Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Upgrading to Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations, Answers to 6 Important Upgrade Questions. Today's session is an update of an earlier presentation. We actually had a lot of positive response from the original session and wanted to update the information to make sure it's current, and it included some information that was requested from our past surveys. So we hope you find this information even more useful in your quest for answers. My name is Nicole Adams. I'm moderator for today's event. Before we get started, we do have a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, participants will be placed on mute. And yes, you will receive a link to today's presentation and recording. We will hold our Q&A session at the end of today's presentation, but feel free to enter any questions you might have throughout the course of the presentation in the questions pane, and we'll make sure we do our best to get running your business on Microsoft Dynamics AX, and you're no doubt aware that these products are approaching the end of their life cycles. So in this presentation, you're going to learn a little bit more about what that means and how that could potentially affect your company. While you see 4.0, 2009 and 2012 listed here, our presentation is not going to focus on 4.0, but many of these concepts are still applicable. And so at that point, I think it's really a good time to take a pulse on the audience to figure out which version you're currently on. So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and launch that. So if you could let us know which version of Dynamics AX you're currently on. Are you on 4.0, 2009? Are you in 2012, 2012 R2, or 2012 R3? So it looks like the majority of you are on 2012 R3. And then we have some folks that are on 2012, and there's actually a good portion are on 4.0. So again, you've still come to the right place. A lot of this information is still applicable. To give you a little bit of background information about the company, Sikich is a national technology consultancy that delivers best fit technologies to drive business outcomes. Being a part of a large CPA practice, we're actually very conscious about risk mitigation, which is really at the heart of today's presentation. So within our technology practice, we have over 75 dedicated full-time consultants within our AX and Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations team. And those individuals average 15 to 20 years of experience. Today, I have the privilege of introducing one of our very knowledgeable experts, Debbie Altham. And Debbie hails from New Zealand and is based just outside of Portland, Oregon. She's been working with ERP and more specifically dynamic solutions for over 20 years and helps companies deliver bottom line business value through better engaged customers, empowered employees, and optimized operations. So at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over.
Everybody, and welcome to our webcast today. The content of my presentation is aimed at organizations that are currently running AX, as Nicole mentioned earlier, and are somewhere in the process of deciding when and if they're going to be moving to Dynamics 365 for operations. So I'm going to assume everyone who's listening in knows what Dynamics 365 for finance and operations is, but for any of you who don't, it is really the next version of the Dynamics AX product. It was generally released in November 2016, but it was initially branded as Dynamics 365 for Operations. And I think somewhere in there it was AX7 for a while. But in July 2017, it was rebranded as Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations. And yes, it is a bit of a mouthful. When I'm talking it through the presentation, we'll talk about Dynamics 365. I'll be meaning the finance and operations piece, not this customer engagement piece. Now, if you notice when you Google or Bing the web and look for products with Dynamics 365, you're going to find information around customer engagement, which is the newest version of CRM, as well as Business Central, which is the new version of NAV. So when you're looking around the web at Dynamics 365 information, just be really careful to make sure that you're looking around at the finance and operations information. A lot of documents and information you can find doesn't really expressly say finance and operations. So anyway, moving on, let's have a look at our agenda today. So today we're trying to cover some of the most commonly asked questions that our team have fielded from organizations who are looking to upgrade from Dynamics AX to 365. First of all, can I do nothing? So what's the risk of doing nothing? How long can we do nothing? Or we've heard a few times, you've got to be kidding, we've just finished rolling out 2012. So we don't hear that so much anymore, but the question's still relevant. And if there are people on the call that are interested in bedding in and staying where they're at, hopefully we'll be able to provide some advice for you. Now, if you work out that you don't want to do nothing, the next question is around timing. It's when. When does it become imperative for me to start looking at upgrading? Are there any pricing incentives for me to do it now versus, say, in 12 or 24 months? The number 3, I'm going to, why should I upgrade? A lot of organizations, even though they know they should and they will, are really finding that they need to put a business case towards their to their leadership to make sure that the upgrade is cost justified. So we're going to talk a little bit about the kind of statistics and information that you can put together to do that business case. So another question that was very common about 18 months ago is, do I really have to go to the cloud? You know, is on-premise an option or a hybrid model option? And I'll give you probably my personal opinion on that. The 5th question, how do I build a business case? That again is what we've seen with clients who need to put those justifications towards their board. Lastly, we're going to talk about some of the commonly known things that you need to consider when you're planning your upgrade. All right, what I'm going to note before we move forward is that I'm not particularly technical. I'm not really going to spend much time talking about the tools and the actual process of upgrade. I'm looking at upgrading more from a timing and a business case perspective. So moving on. Can you do nothing? Well, that really does depend on a few things. Firstly, what version are you on? What the impact has on you on not upgrading does very much depend on what version you're on at the moment. And the answer to that question is quite different for someone who's sitting on, let's say, a highly modified version of 2009 than it is for someone who's just done a AX 2012 R3 rollout. The other thing you need to consider is your organizational risk profile. So I've come across a number of organizations who have a corporate security strategy policy that they will never have a software program that they use that is not under mainstream support. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Lastly, is upgrading really the best thing for your organization? You've heard all the benefits and they don't resonate or they don't align to what you think is of value to the organization. If that's the case for you, this webcast might help you understand what your choices are for the next steps. So first, I'm going to walk through some of the more common reasons clients have cited for doing nothing. And what we do hear quite a lot is that it's a cost of migration, it's a disruption to our business, and the licensing is simply unaffordable. Now, the cost will depend on a whole lot of factors, but if you're sitting on a highly modified version of 2009, the cost's likely to be material. If you're on 2012 R3 with maybe not so many modifications, the cost's going to be a lot less. So the reason for that is 2012 had functional parity when it moved to 365 when it was first released. So the system has pretty much the same, very, very similar features and functions. 365 is obviously off and being developed since it migrated, but the two systems are far more alike than 2012 and 2009. So I want to pause here for a minute, and I'm going to say something that may be contentious. If an upgrade to D365 is unaffordable and you cannot see circumstances where you will get value out of it, it is legitimate. If you don't need the size, the robustness, and the complexity available that F&O 365 can support, perhaps you were really given a good deal when you first bought it, and now you find yourselves overwhelmed with the features and functions and the ongoing effort and cost. It may be legitimate for you to look at something else. one thing is for sure, if you don't put aside sufficient budget to achieve a successful implementation, you risk project failure. So if you do really truly believe D365 is too much for you, let's say you've downsized, you've sold off large swaths of your business, it is legitimate for you to look at something that may fit you better. I'd like to suggest that Business Central, which is Microsoft's new cloud version of NAV, might be an option for you. Now, there isn't a technical path forward. There's no sort of migration tools to downsize you from an AX installation to a BC installation, but there may be some licensing benefits and discounts for you if you are wanting to move off AX and you are current on your maintenance. So yeah, I don't know that moving off AX entirely is a choice for a lot of the clients, of course. So the other thing is, let's say you like the product, you want to stay on the product, but you cannot realistically afford to move to the new version. So what I do is recommend spending your time on risk mitigation, hunkering down, don't change the system. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Focus on security, maintenance of those underlying systems that support your AX installation, and make sure you've got really solid business continuity strategies in place so you know what you do have is safe and secure, minimizing those points of failure. Okay, for those of you who are looking at the path from AX to D365 and believe it is a legitimate one for your organization, we've had a lot of conversations with companies who are looking at the upgrade that have focused on some very specific reasons to delay or defer. So looking at a few of them now, and maybe some counter arguments. What I would say is ERP systems, in my experience, are a little bit like people. They do rise to deliver what's expected of them, and if you don't expect much of your ERP, if it's an overhead, a necessary evil, then you're likely to spend more time minimizing the cost. But if you can see it's going to be of real value to your bottom line, gives you some strategic advantages, then, and have it positioned as a value creator, then it's really important to make sure that the ERP evolves in support of your business. You're looking at an upgrade. One of the most important things you'll probably have to do next is understand exactly what the effort is to do the upgrade and have a good understanding of the total cost of ownership, or the costs that revolve around upgrading and maintaining a new cloud system. Right, so before we move off this conversation around doing nothing, I want to drill down on this terminology that I think is pretty important. So first of all, mainstream support. When Microsoft stops mainstream support, they no longer enhance the product. You're not getting any bug fixes or patches. There's no ability to do any warranty claims against the software, and there is no acceptance. They don't accept requests for any feature or design changes. So unless it's a policy of your organization to always be on a mainstream supported product, why wouldn't you just sail past mainstream support? So what does extended support mean, and why is that different and more important? So extended support, once that ends, you will no longer count on Microsoft to issue security patches and reliability patches. And what does that really mean in practice? Is security important? Is it important to you? So hopefully that's a rhetorical question. I would refer you to that website that you see there. That link will take you to Microsoft's mainstream and extended support policy information. But what I want to do now is let's have a look at where the various Dynamics products are in terms of their life cycle on this support. So AX 2009 Service Pack 1, we're not even going to look at RTM. It is not supported at all. So AX 2009 Service Pack 1, mainstream support finished in 2018. And you'll notice that for RTM and R2, for AX 2012, the mainstream support also ended on 9th of October 2018. So we have all sailed past that date. So if you're on 2012 RTM or R2, or 2009, you are now no longer under mainstream support. Extended support, which means you can access security patches and fixes, and they will be issued, extends through to 2021 for both the 2009 SP1 and 2012 RTM and R2. For those of you who are on R3, the mainstream support, you've got a bit of breathing room. It ends on that same day, 2021, for mainstream support. And then extended support will run through to January 10, 2023. So again, think about what no security patches means, and think about how you would explain to an auditor or someone who is concerned about security and risk in your organization on why you would have an ERP system that does not get security patches released if needed.
Okay, so now that Debbie's reviewed those all-important end of support dates, let's check to see where you are in the process of upgrading. All right, so we're going to do a quick poll again here. So are you currently implementing? Are you evaluating Dynamics 365 as an ERP option, or have you just started thinking about it? I'm going to give you a few seconds here to vote. Oh, it looks like there's a split here. Some of you are actually evaluating. Are we going to move to F&O? And then some of you just started thinking about it. So great. Hopefully you find this information interesting. And for those of you who are currently implementing, that's also awesome. So let's go ahead and get back to Debbie.
The next question we're going to address is, does timing matter? And I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to say yes for a couple of reasons. There's obviously the impact of those dates that we just went through, but there's also some licensing and migration entitlements that you should be interested in. So I'm going to spend the majority of this part of the presentation talking about a really exciting topic, licensing. And I have to say that this is really the quantum mechanics of Microsoft. You may think it is AI, but it's not. It's licensing. So it's reasonably difficult to grasp, and I'm going to say it's quite hard to explain, and everyone's got different opinions regarding how you interpret the licensing guide. But before I start, I want to say there's a couple of caveats. I am not going to consider anyone who's got licenses for CRM or Dynamics 365 CE as well as F&O. I'm going to look at this as F&O and AX just in isolation. Okay. So we talked about mainstream support ending 2021. And I want to share this. It's like a sample project plan working backwards. And I've got a key date in there. And I'll talk to you about why that date is important shortly. But what I've given you is sort of like, all right, I want to be live before mainstream support ends. I should be we should go live at least 6 months before that. But there is a big licensing date, October 12, 2019, that we want to talk about. Now, if your project's going to take, 18 months, 12 to 18 months, you really do want to start your project around October 2019. If you want longer to do it, obviously you're going to have to start thinking about that now. Now, when should you have been preparing your budget and business case? I would have suggested that was back in 2018. And hoping that you have got it approved and ready to go for 2019. All right, what's important about that? Actually, I'll just take a slice back for a minute. So why are we saying to migrate your licenses on or before 10, 12, 19? So currently, at time of recording, Microsoft have on offer a 40% discount on the subscription annuity for existing customers migrating from AX, NAV, and GP to Dynamics 365 F&O. That 40% will be available for people who are on an EA as well as a CSP, and I'm going to talk about licensing mechanisms in a minute. But what you should know is that if you are looking at upgrading, there is a date, October 12th, 2019, at which that discount will disappear. Again, 40% discount off the retail or listed price of the subscription for Dynamics 365 F&O. All right, so yes, timing matters because you may very much want to access that discount, particularly if you've got a 3-year EA and you want to lock that 40% in for your next 3 to 5 years. Okay, so before we go any deeper into licensing, I just want to spend a little bit of time giving you some definitions. This is what makes licensing hard too, is we have this special list of acronyms. So what the licensing migration is going to mean to you is going to be different depending on how you transacted your purchase of AX in the first place. An EA is a volume purchasing agreement. It's for organizations these days need over 500 desktops, and generally they're 500 desktops running Office, Windows, etc. Now, AX used to be able to be purchased on the EA from 2012. 2009 was not available on an EA. So the EA provides you the ability to track directly transact directly with Microsoft, and it's usually handled by a licensing solution partner, LSP. They used to be called a large account reseller, a LAR. And someone like Dell or CDW, you would have got an invoice for them for your Microsoft software. Those agreements can be between 3 and 5 years. Now, the server cloud enrollment is an EA addendum that has been in the past provided to customers who have already got an EA and want to separate out their cloud-based applications. And along with that agreement, I believe you have to have some minimum level of Azure consumption. So an EA organization, someone who's bought their AX on an EA, will be paying some level of software assurance, and that's an annual fee. The way that the EA calculates it, it's about 25% of the value of the installed licenses, 25%. But the most impactful thing about being on an EA on 2012 is upgrading. You need to, firstly, do you want to put Dynamics 365 on the EA? And 2, where are you in your 3-year term? If your 3-year term finishes on, let's say, August, you will access that 40% discount. If your EA 3-year term ends 2 weeks after that October date, you may want to consider renewing your EA early so that you will have access to that 40%. The Dynamics price list. So if you didn't buy using that volume agreement mechanism with Microsoft, you will have probably bought on something that used to be called the Dynamics price list. And that's when you paid the partner that you bought it off, and you continue to pay BREP, which is that 16% per annum that you're paying to keep your system current. So that's what a DPL is, and BREP is the annuity related to DPL. So CSP, for those of you who are on AX, probably may not be familiar with it. It's a new licensing mechanism for Microsoft Cloud Services. You can buy Dynamics or Office or much of the Microsoft stack through a CSP agreement. Now, there are 2 types of CSP partner. There are CSP direct and a CSP indirect. Direct partners have a higher volume threshold to meet, and they transact directly with Microsoft. So Sikich, for example, is a direct CSP partner. You may have a partner that is a CSP indirect. They don't meet the volume requirements, and they will be working in the background as a indirect. They will be associated with a direct CSP partner. So I'm sure that was clear as mud. Neither of these configurations should make a difference on how your partner's ability to sell you a subscription to your software. So these things are important because how you upgrade your license will very much depend on how you bought it in the first place. So some things you have to think through. 1, what version are you on? 2, did you buy on the EA or the DPL? I am assuming everyone who's listening has kept their maintenance current. The 40% discount does not apply to anyone who is not current on their maintenance. How you buy your new licenses, do you have a choice? Is there different ways that you could buy your new licenses? And timing, when does your EA or your Dynamics price list renew? So I'm going to walk through each of those. All right, so what version are you on? If you're on AX 2009, it was never on the EA in the first place. So you'll have acquired your license through the DPL. So when I talk about timing your migration, keep in mind that you will be a DPL client. Now, you may wish to buy your D365 licenses on your EA if you have one now. This goes for 2012 customers as well. Or you may want to buy them on CSP. Now, the strengths and weaknesses of the, or drawbacks of the two buying methods is really beyond the scope of this call. But don't assume just because you've got an EA, it's the best way to buy it. Conversely, just because you've had a DPL license, don't assume CSP is necessarily the best way to buy it. There's a really great decision-making tree, I think, on YouTube that can help walk you through what the best purchasing mechanism is. And there are good reasons why you might choose one over the other. All right, so Dynamics 2009 licenses were for concurrent users. So what you really have to do is you have to move your licenses from concurrent to named. And that can be a little bit of a heavy lifting exercise to work out exactly what you need for your new licenses, because there are new categories: full users, activity, and team users. So you'll need to go through those through your the people who are actually using the system and try and work out which of those three categories of users they will need to migrate to. So it's quite hard to get it right, and certainly we've got license translation spreadsheets that can help you determine what sort of users you've got. If you're on 2009, we do recommend a number of simple steps. Identify every user in the system, take the licensing guide and assign the likely role designation for each of those users to the name, and then that role in the licensing guide is then tied to a particular license type. So the good news, though, is that there is no migration formula or rules if you're running 2009 concurrent going through to D365. Microsoft's been great here. They've said just subscribe for the number you need. We will give you that 40% discount and honor that on the equivalent numbers that you're bringing over. So there's really no benefit to migrating users that you don't need, because you're going to be having to pay for them per user per month. So for 2012 clients who've got 2012 licenses, there's a pretty close correlation between the three tiers of user types. 2012 had enterprise full and full users. Sorry, 2012 had enterprise users, we now have full. 2012 had functional, and we now have activity. And the task and team users are similar, but do know that the team users in D365 are pretty special now. They can provide read access to the system, which of course under 2012 we never had that option. The team users also work incidentally across finance and operations and customer engagement, which is CRM. All right, moving on. So how does how you originally bought your licenses matter? This is really simply it. If your license is a DPL, you'll be on a 1-year renewal cycle. If your licenses are EA, you're on a 3-year or maybe even 5-year renewal cycle. So the general rule of thumb is, if you migrate your licenses midterm, it will necessitate keeping your software assurance or BREP going, and you'll end up paying more. Not much more, but still more. And the last point I'd like to make is any maintenance or BREP or software assurance you've already paid for is a sunk cost. There's no credits back for that. So thinking about timing, if you've got time to run on your agreement, either if it's DPL and you're paying 16% or it's your EA, we place your order using a SKU on the Microsoft price list that will take that into account. It's called an add-on SKU. So it's basically a top-up of your annuity. You know, you've got BREP or you've got SA running. This tops it up. So with the add-on SKU, you pay a subscription and keep paying your annuities. So you can carry on paying like that forever. Microsoft haven't announced that that program's going to end. Or when your next maintenance is up for renewal, when you choose to, you can migrate to the From SA SKU. So again, two different sorts of SKUs. There is the add-on SKU, which is a top up to your existing annual or 3-yearly contract. And there is a From SA SKU that you do at the end of your contract. You stop paying BREP, you stop paying software assurance, and you just start paying that subscription. And again, that subscription up until 12th of October is a 40% discount. Right, is everyone confused? I hope not. As I said, quantum mechanics. So the From SA SKU is available to the end of your maintenance period and assumes you've stopped paying your maintenance and you'll only pay your subscription. The timing needs to be spot on, as you really only use that SKU when your maintenance is current, and the most logical thing is to swap the SKU immediately before your annuity lapses. So think about this way: if you're let's say you're on DPL, your annuity is in August, you're going to want to swap to, you want to take advantage of the 40% discount. What do you do? If you renew on 1st of September, you'll pay a whole 12 months. No one's going to refund you, but you will have to go to the subscription model before 10/12. So you've sunk a lot of money that you didn't need to. It's probably more cost positive to, prior to that August renewal, you then swap over using the From SA SKU, access the 40% discount, and get those extra couple of months on subscription rather than your BREP. Whew. All right. Couple of things to know. You only get the 40% off on the equivalent number of cows. So if you're currently in 2012 and you've got, 200 enterprise cows, you'll only get the 40% on 200 full licenses in D365. Dual rights. So something useful to know means that Microsoft do include in the licensing your ability to stay on 2012 as you implement. I would refer everyone to the transition guide. It's online, and it does talk you through all of this, including the discounts, I believe. And the licensing rules for on-prem and retail are different than standard Dynamics AX. So I would suggest you check the transition guide when you're looking at them. Right, that's exhausting. So that was the licensing section. I even confused myself some of the time. Hopefully I've been able to give you some more information about that than you already have, but just be aware, take note of when your annuities are up or your EA is up, and take special note of that October date with the discounts. Before we move on in terms of timing, I just want to talk about one thing, and that is the availability of resourcing. So assuming lots of people want to take advantage of the October date, there's nothing stopping you migrating your licenses to get the 40% and still doing nothing. But we would expect that a fair amount of people would want to start their implementation almost as soon as they've done that license migration. So one thing to consider is really the capacity across the channel and our ability as partners to help support you in your upgrade. It's interesting. I think now, all of the net new sales are on D365. So really good consultants are always wanting to work on D365 projects. What you need to consider is the availability of good qualified resources. When you're looking at the resources to do your project, I would recommend that you ask for people who've had experience in upgrades. You will tend to find there's more veterans in the upgrade side, potentially, because it does take good experience, good understanding and knowledge of the system to talk to a customer who knows the system well. I guess if you're brand new to Dynamics and you're only implementing it for the first time, a client in that boat is unlikely to be able to provide the same level of challenge to a consultant than someone who's been working with it for 10 to 20 years, or 10 years anyway. So that was just something to note, that there is the idea that the resourcing capacity is something that you may need to consider. You might find a lot of people all moving at once this discount comes into play. So I guess the only thing I can say is, if you want to get out of the math, either do it straight away, or I'm not going to suggest waiting, because then you're crashing over those support periods. Okay, that was a pretty meaty topic. So we're now at number 3. Why should I upgrade? Okay, so we're assuming that you're going to do the upgrade. Sitting there doing nothing forever is not feasible. Here are some of the most common reasons our clients have cited when making the move to D365. You know, we've discussed the impact of Microsoft support ending, and those organizations who are concerned about that support are generally already have moved or in the process of moving now. But one of the other common drivers we see quite a lot is aging infrastructure and the impending need to invest in additional on-prem hardware and software. So this is when the discussion invariably comes around to the option of moving workloads off-premise, and rather than sink more money into internal infrastructure, organizations are looking at the cloud. So the total cost of ownership models that do exist, they can help you evaluate the difference in cost, and they'll take into account things like not only the purchase price of that on-prem software and servers, but also the ongoing service and maintenance and labor costs. For organizations thinking about security of the system, this is when the conversation moves to implementing systems for high availability and disaster recovery. So that's really important to know. With D365, it comes with a Microsoft commitment for high availability and disaster recovery. Anyone who's ever crunched the numbers of putting in place an on-prem high availability and disaster recovery solution understands that it adds a huge additional cost to your installation. It can easily double or more the infrastructural investment required to keep those systems running securely. So it is of interest, if those things are important to you, that D365 has that covered. If you were going to try and do that without moving to the cloud, I would suggest there's a huge amount of extra cost. Right, the other driver we've seen quite commonly is the desire to modernize systems, you know, the digital transformation conversation, you know, becoming more flexible, agile, and meeting changing market needs. So when you're stuck in that proverbial electronic concrete, it's difficult and it's costly, and it's also risky to make major changes to the system. It's hard to introduce new ISV products and also to re-engineer workloads. And we all know the pace of business change is such that those people who want to be market leaders need to keep those business apps alongside them and moving with them. Those who let their ERP leave it behind then tend to see a whole lot of business users running amok. So downloading point solutions, subscribing to web services, and nothing integrated and not part of the corporate system strategy. So this is sort of makes IT a little bit like a job of whack-a-mole, where apps are popping up everywhere, creating security risk, data silos, and fiefdoms within each department too. So don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating that ERP is the right thing for every use case. But when I see and I talk to a lot of existing and prospective customers, it's these side systems getting out of control that has meant the ERP has languished on early versions. So, you know, in the old days, it used to be Access. It has always been Excel. The build-up of things like massive amounts of Excel spreadsheets, which papers over the cuts of not upgrading ERP. So easing the burden of integration, ensuring the business workflows flow unimpeded between the apps, this is all potentially competitive advantage to the customers who are willing to do it. And on that point, I'd say one of the most interesting changes in the mood around Dynamics that I've seen is how many more people are now looking at as more than a transaction processing application. So the term ERP is sort of going away, it's out of favor, and we're now calling it a business applications platform. And after all, this is where a lot of the significant data from the business resides. And then making it easy to feed that data into apps for things like CRM, talent, BI, field service, etc., does make a huge difference for how a business can run. So the bottom line for creating a business case to upgrade doesn't tend to start with this sort of qualitative conversation. Generally, it's about the money. And our recommendation is to build a spreadsheet, have a good idea of the 5 and 10-year TCOs with what you've got now versus where you're going. Show some variance with impacts on costs. So if you started now versus 6 months, 12 months, or 18 months, acknowledging that there are some discounts on offer in one of those terms. You need to know your existing costs, maintenance fees, hardware and labor support, the labor to support that hardware, and your upgrade costs, as well as the new subscription fees. And then use those numbers as the basis for building that business case to upgrade. All right. Here's when I get opinionated. So, do I really have to go to the cloud? So going to the cloud has been a really positive driver for a lot of organizations. They are looking to upgrade to D365 because they want to move to the cloud. But I want to take a minute to talk about the choice that maybe you have in front of you, the cloud, on-prem, or a hybrid. And I want to make something clear. Anyone who's done a small amount of research on the on-prem option will realize that on-prem with Dynamics 365 does not mean completely disconnected from the internet. So Lifecycle Services, if you've looked at D365, you'll have heard of that. It's a management tool that runs within D365, is only available in the cloud, regardless if you're on-prem or not. So you can keep all your applications and your data on-premise, but ultimately the cloud connectivity with LCS is fundamental to the operation of D365. So be very clear, there is no zero internet access version. If you want to run your ERP without internet access, Dynamics 365 is not an option. All right, so to my argument for cloud. And again, I would like to say that's the opinion of the speaker, not necessarily anyone else. But here's what I think. The annuity revenue streams, they reign supreme in share price. So all of the largest software companies, annuity revenues are doing the most, making the most difference to their overall company value. So you just look at the correlation between the share price and how big their annuity streams are running to understand why this push is pervasive. So the largest people who are making software, they're creating a platform to generate annuity revenue way into the future. And that platform is also made available to people who build apps. That's going to drive cloud consumption with their own applications. So annuity revenue builds up over time, creating a continual revenue stream, which in turn drives higher company value. So for the people who are building these apps, this means a higher resale value for their company if they're privately held, and obviously a higher share price if they're not. So for the giants in the game, cloud providers and app builders, Microsoft, Amazon, Web Services, SAP, Salesforce, Oracle, all of us. This annuity revenue stream, the subscriptions, translate to a higher value company and higher incomes for everybody. So the compulsion for anyone developing software now is to move to these annuity revenue streams delivered through the cloud. So what I would say is if you're trying to avoid the cloud, Everyone is building their solutions for cloud now because of the attraction of those revenue, the way that the revenue works and the value that it adds to their business. So, that change started slowly, but now it's everywhere. And the massive R&D budgets that are going into these vendors, they're all going to the applications that are built in the cloud, and they're charged by that sort of subscription model. Any older on-premise products, they're all in their end of life, with low or sometimes non-existent budgets to support them. So the challenge to people who don't want to go in the cloud is that perhaps within 5 years, buying an on-premise application is going to start being really difficult, particularly with ERP. Within 10 years, it might be impossible to buy an ERP system that doesn't run on the cloud. And those people who are making on-prem applications are either going to be very, very niche or they're going to be out of business. So, I'm going to use BlackBerry as an example, and apologies to anyone who still uses BlackBerry, but it was really in its peak in 2008. Now, I can still remember that on my BlackBerry. So 2008 is only 11 years ago. And in 2008, we weren't all desperate for touchscreen phones and things that did anything more than just email or making calls. So new phones have come out, better applications to run on. We're all talking mobility now. Technology we never knew we needed. Now that had killed BlackBerry by 2013. So they had 5 years of rapid technology adoption, driven by the sellers of new phones, and it's completely changed the playing field. So just think about that in technology terms and disruption. So some of the largest corporations might be able to afford a cloud all of their own. It is, after all, the same thing as we have today on premise. It's just a bunch of powerful computers sitting out the back. But cloud is really the way everything is going from a software perspective. My conclusion is this, and whether or not you consider upgrading your ERP or any other business app, that whether or not the cloud is an option is really a moot point. I'm going to say really it's the only choice. So you're probably sitting there saying, hang on a minute, Dynamics have an on-premise option. Why does it even exist? And my response is, I'm not sure. I would say that if you're still thinking it's a valid option, just be very careful to understand the list of features that you will not have if you are on-prem. Take a very close look at the minimum hardware requirements that Microsoft have published. In my mind, it makes it look like those on-prem people have to basically build their own cloud infrastructure. There's some very, very, very heavy hardware commitments that Microsoft are asking for those running on cloud. Certainly, Sikich, we have not found a customer yet that cannot be convinced to move to go on the cloud as opposed to on-prem. Okay. Second to last point, I think. How do you build a business case? So far we've looked at the option of doing nothing. We've concluded that those who can't afford to do nothing forever are now looking at timing. We've looked at the impact of licensing and resource availability on that decision. And we've talked a bit about some of the compelling reasons why clients are already making the shift. And from my perspective, the shift to the cloud. So how do you go about building that business case? So as I mentioned earlier, there are really two different things you need to focus on. The numbers and the business benefits that justify the numbers. The reason we have to do both is that I've spoken to lots of organizations considering ERP implementation or upgrade, and they've told me that even if the software and services were for free, their decision to change ERPs would not be an easy one because it's got a huge impact on their business. So your business case needs to justify not only the cost, but as well as the effort, the disruption, and the risk that change brings to your organization. So as implementation partners, we understand the effort and commitment that's required of clients to embark on these sorts of projects. And ERP, we know that often touches every part of the business, and people are already busy getting their day-to-day jobs done. It's not an easy thing, and we don't go around promoting upgrading ERP as if it's a walk in the park. We certainly understand that we're making a decision to move. Your leadership are entitled to a solid and well-articulated business case. So let's look at the numbers. When looking at investments, the TCO is the go-to spreadsheet. We've built these out for our clients. Template looks at 5, 8, 10 years. And I know that there's some pretty heavy assumptions at 10 years, but when comparing it with on-premise, you really do need to go past 5 because you want to see the impact of hardware and infrastructure upgrades at sort of year 6. So that brings us up to the point that if you're still wanting to consider an on-prem, you should compare the TCO of upgrading to the cloud with the TCO of doing an on-prem option. The ROI is something different. It's another calculator that's sometimes used, and it takes that cost and it challenges it with a value the project is expected to realize for the business and calculates a payback period. So I probably found more CFOs who don't like ROI from a metric perspective. They probably distrust some of the ratios that are used and the rates of efficiency and so forth that have been presented, but it is absolutely worth putting together a list of all of the benefits that you would expect to accrue, if or even if not, you add some numbers to that. So regardless of valuing ROI, there really is a good reason to look at the value that you believe you'll get out of it. Not only will it help you keep your eye on the prize as you go through an implementation and upgrade, but it will also help you articulate to your partner what the value is you're expecting to get out of the project. Okay, last section. What else do I need to know? Okay, so I'm going to drawing this webcast to a close. I'm going to go quickly through some other areas that I want to highlight that you probably already know that are going to be impactful for this upgrade. Or some of the things that it might take you a little bit of time to dig out if you're only just starting. Now, this is a short and by no means complete list, but it's a list of things that have been a surprise to some of our clients as they've moved through the process of discovery. Okay, so firstly, Dynamics 365 is now subject to Microsoft's modern support policy. It is Microsoft's effort to drive clients to keep up to date with both their applications and their supporting infrastructure. And we have actually seen some policy movement from the original launch of D365 to today. So what this is about is it explains you the reasons why this is the last upgrade we're really ever going to need to talk to you about. Microsoft have continual updates, and there are some obligations on clients to keep their systems up to date. So no more getting it in and letting it work for the next 5 years before we need to touch it. There is an expectation that you will be keeping your system from this point forward up to date. And we're using language like evergreen or continuous updates for this. I've given you a link there on the PowerPoint. So I'd suggest you go and have a read and understand what's new about this new world order. Something that a lot of clients didn't quite realize that the production system in D365 is completely locked down. As a partner, we don't have access to it. And as a customer, you don't have access to it. And it needs to be locked down for a reason. Microsoft have provided service level agreements, SLAs, around uptime for the solution for D365. And if they had partners or customers in there fiddling around with the production systems, they wouldn't be able to offer those SLAs. So that's something to know. Modifications. Okay, so if you're in 2009, all of your modifications will need to be redeveloped as extensions. Certainly for customers on 2012, the modifications there are some tools to help you with migrating your modifications to extensions. But again, to allow for the modern support policy and the continuous update, Microsoft has changed how we do modifications or customizations to the system. And all of those personalizations, if you like, are now called extensions. And it's only through changing the way that we do modifications is Microsoft able to offer that continuous update process with some level of confidence. And lastly, a call out to people who are interested in Microsoft Dynamics 365 CE, used to be CRM, or Talent, or Power BI. When you get your D365 F&O license, you have some entitlements and some pretty low cost licensing to get you up into some of these other products. So that's definitely worthwhile having a look at. All right. I think we're
Debbie, thank you so much for that. Before we get into questions, we don't have a ton of time left, so I'll be very quick. Just wanted to direct your attention to the handouts. You'll find that licensing video that Debbie referenced, as well as the Dynamics 365 transition guide. And we've also included our own 14-point blueprint to migrating from Dynamics to Dynamics 365. So with that, we'll go ahead and get into some questions. Debbie, it looks like you and Kim had a good conversation around licensing. If you wanted to kind of share that with the
Sure.
rest of um, the group here. So the question was, how long is the 40% discount good for? First year only, 3 years, etc. And so Debbie.
Yeah. So thanks, Nicole. So the 40% discount depends on what buying mechanism you're using. If you are buying on an EA, it will be for the remaining term of your EA. So if you've got 1 year left to run, if you've got brand new EA with 3 years on it, or a brand new EA with 5 years on it, it will run for the duration of the EA. If you're buying on CSP, it will run for the length of duration of the CSP. And at the moment, the maximum length of time a CSP agreement runs is 1 year. The other thing I did mention to Kim was that we believe that date in October 2019 is firm. We have heard nothing to suggest that Microsoft are reviewing and extending it. That's not to say that tomorrow we might not find out that discount date will extend. So that's just something to be aware that at the moment I've heard no chatter that suggests that date will extend.
Okay, great. Donna asked, does the licensing discount include CRM?
The licensing 40%. So when you buy, if you buy the entire Dynamics plan option, which is the CRM plus the ERP, if you look at the retail prices, ERP by itself is $190 per user per month. If you buy it bundled with CE, it's $210 per user per month. So a very low incremental cost with CE. If you buy that full $210 per user per month, you are entitled to 40% off the lot if you are migrating. That's what I believe.
Great. Again, if there's any questions, please go ahead and pop them in the questions pane or even in the chat. I do have one other question. If we're considering Business Central, what's the biggest difference between it and finance and operations?
So Business Central, Microsoft have positioned as the sort of like the lower tier option in the Microsoft stack. So with Dynamics 365 F&O, targeted at the multis, so multi-company, multi-currency, multi-site is pretty important. But basically, F&O has a significantly more robust level of features and functions. The biggest difference between the two will be in terms of how much functionality you need to support your business and how complex the functionality you require to support business processes. From a user experience perspective, BC is a great looking product. It's modern, it's completely refreshed, it's got a fabulous user interface. But yeah, it would be really the breadth and the depth of the functionality of the product. So for Dynamics F&O, you're less likely to need as many ISV products to fulfill the requirements for your entire business as you would need for Business Central. One of the attributes of Business Central is a large number of ISVs that actually fill some of those functional gaps. As I said, that's probably the main difference.
Okay. And then we did have a question around some ROI. So what kind of ROI have you heard from customers and then what's like the payback time?
So what I would do is there are some of the analysts have created some payback calculations, and I'm not 100% sure who they are. But Nicole, we can find that paper. It was done in conjunction with Microsoft. One of the big analyst organizations created an ROI calculation. So that is the only one that I have seen. It's a pretty phenomenal amount of ROI. So I'd read really carefully into how they've calculated some of the returns. And payback period, I can't even recall what that particular paper said. But Nicole, if we can put a link to that paper somewhere available for the attendees, that might be the best way to go about it.
Okay, we'll make sure we add that. If there are any other questions, please let us know. Feel free to type those in. But Debbie, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope you found this information valuable and useful. And stay tuned, you will receive a recording of today's presentation and all of the documents that we just went over, including the one Debbie just mentioned. All right. Great. Well, thank you all for your time today.